It is with great pleasure that I welcome my colleague, Rabbi Dr. Charles Middleburgh, to the LJS and to this pulpit this morning. He is no stranger to the LJS. He is Dean and Director of Studies at Liobek College, and since 1984 has taught over the years Bible, Parshanut, Rabbinic Literature, Aramaic, and Practical Rabbinics. Rabbi Middleburgh was Associate Editor of our prayer book, Siddur Lev Chadash, and co-editor of our High Holy Day Machzor, Ruach Hadashah. He has edited and contributed to a number of books and has published 2 collections of poems inspired by the natural world. His research interests are focused on liturgy, the biblical prophets, and climate change and species extinction. There could be no more appropriate Torah portion for you this morning, Charles, as there, as I said, are no less than 3 references to lions, the animal that I think is most frequently mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, and of which I believe you are a big fan. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachmochem mibeit Adonai.
You never know who you're going to see when you come out on the bima, and you look to the congregation, and seeing a plethora of rabbis is, well, yes, it is what it is. I, though, do particularly want to acknowledge our teacher, Rabbi Professor Jonathan Maganet, who's never stopped teaching Bible. And it's my great pleasure at this stage in my life to be second examiner to 2 of his Bible courses. He continues to inspire and educate our students. And I may say he does it so well that there's never been a presentation that I've heard over the last few years that I haven't felt I've learned from. And that is the sign of a very fine teacher. My pleasure being here, standing on this bima, has been immeasurably enhanced by the Shalichat Tzibur this morning. Thanks to the initiative of Rabbi Professor Deborah Kahn-Harris and her own will and courage, Dea Kulikovsky left Brazil to come to complete her rabbinic studies at Liobek College, and I am so glad she did so. She's a powerhouse, a force for optimism, and, God willing, will have a UK-based rabbinic career that I'm sure will be an illustrious one and rich in benefits to others. I dedicate this sermon with love and respect to 2 moral giants, a part of whose lives I was privileged to share, Bob Kirk and John Rayner, Zecher Tzadikim Livracha. At the end of last year, a much anticipated volume was published by Viking Penguin. It is what it says on the cover: Roger McGough, The Collected Poems, 1959 to 2024. Described by the former poet laureate and no mean slouch herself, Carol Ann Duffy, as the patron saint of poetry, it is a joy with gems on every page. I am slightly biased, but McGough is my favorite modern poet in a very crowded field, and he has never let me down. Mind you, at this point in a new year, let alone preaching in this hallowed space, it is another poem and another much more obscure poet which enters unbidden into my mind. The poet is Minnie Louise Haskins, and the poem is, "And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, go into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be better to you than light and safer than a known way. Haskins and her poem became world famous in 1939 because King Charles's grandfather, George VI, quoted it in his Christmas broadcast in December 1939, when this country and many others were faced by the existential challenge of the rampant aggression and murderous power of Nazi Germany. Hopefully, I'm not quoting it in as dire a context as that in January 2025. But many of us might say that there are plenty of known unknowns, let alone unknown unknowns, that will dominate our fears, our thoughts, and our world in 2025. When Alex offered me this date to preach, I said to her that there would hopefully be plenty to talk about and celebrate. Then the November United States elections took place, and the outcome that beforehand stretched credulity to breaking point became fact, since when we have all been waiting for the reimposition on the world of P45, who will also be P47. The dream of a first woman president of the United States of America was shattered. And for many of us, the country we thought we knew and the people we thought we understood showed itself to be something altogether different. As this year starts, as you have heard, we end the reading of the first of the 5 books of Moses and the ending of the long and rich story of Joseph, his siblings, and their devious old dad. And what dominates Parashat Vayechi are the 2 blessings, Jacob's of his Egyptian grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and the so-called blessing of his 12 sons. The former is actually quite beautiful and states, the God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who redeemed me from all harm, bless the boys. In them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth. Jacob being Jacob, however, there is a twist, and he effectively blesses the older son second and the younger first, deliberately crossing his hands to make sure that his message is clear. Joseph doesn't get it at first and tries to rearrange the old man's hands, but Jacob persists and spells out that Ephraim will have the greater stature of the 2. Perhaps this should have prepared Joseph to expect the unexpected when he gathered once more at Jacob's bedside with his brothers to hear the patriarch's final words to his nearest, albeit quite clearly in many cases, not his dearest. But even had he been primed, I don't think he could have expected that only his brother Judah and he would be singled out in unequivocally positive terms. Endings are so important, but beginnings arguably even more so. They may well be difficult, but at least there is usually time to make sense of life, to, as we put it, get our act together. And this can apply not only to the beginning of life itself, but to the beginning of a new venture, a political leadership position, for example. How grim it must be to start a leadership role when the world is in so much turmoil and so many time-honored institutions seem to be under threat of collapse. How hard it must be to sense that human society has become so complex, so unpredictable, so vociferous, and so prone to malign manipulation. How difficult, then, to have to fight to find a way through using existing structures which themselves show signs of an inability to cope. How impossible to do anything that takes time in a world governed by round-the-clock news and comment and falsehood, when much of the electorate have the interest and attention span of a 30-second commercial. My favorite line from the immortal Jim Hacker was, "I am the people's leader. I must follow them." And Roger McGough seems to have had something in mind when he wrote one of my favorite poems of his, which goes like this. I want to be the leader. I want to be the leader. Can I be the leader? Can I? I can. Promise? Promise? Yippee, I'm the leader. I am the leader. Okay, what should we do? I suspect that any number of political leaders ask themselves that question when they reach the top of the proverbial pole, providing, of course, they have the innate ability to self-reflect, as opposed to seeing their own reflection everywhere, blinding them to everything else. How they answer it and how effectively plays out over time. And if plans go agley, as oft they do, it is usually their electorates, rather than the leaders themselves, who pay the price. As for the qualities we might wish those we elect or who are elected by others to govern us to possess, we know that the one thing they cannot afford to have if they wish to govern justly, let alone well, is anger and an overweening sense of their own victimhood. When I read the biblical narrative about Jacob, I sense a barely controlled cauldron of resentment, victimhood, and anger. Abraham was a level-headed man. Isaac was somewhat muddle-headed. But in Jacob, you read a man who always knew what he was doing, and overwhelmingly, with one or two notable exceptions, saw everyone else as a dupe or beneath contempt, or both. At the start of a new calendar year, as many of us scan the horizon with dread and existential concern, where can we find some hope? In spite of their father, Judah and Joseph found their own redemption and made a life that was not just good for them, but good for many others too. In time, Judah became a lion and Joseph a fruitful vine. There are surely many such among us, regardless of the political leaders who occupy or blight the global stage, indeed, in spite of them, who will find a better way to deal with the problems that beset us. They will show us true leadership, which must always be dedicated to the maximization of good for the benefit of all the people. Amen.